Welcome back to Mr. News Art Class. It's wonderful to see your smiling faces today. For last week's Zentangle, I showed you 12 different patterns using nothing but squares. Today, I'm going to draw a tile using some of those patterns. To begin a Zentangle tile, I started with a dot in each corner, and then some wavy lines to make a border around the whole square. And then I made a string that loops around inside the borders. And I drew all of those with a regular number 2 pencil, but for the rest of the drawing I'm going to switch to these fine liner pens. I may come back and use this number 2 pencil for a little bit of shading later on, but mostly I'm just going to use the pens. Now what I've done here is gone over the string with some path following patterns, and I chose one that's a really dark pattern and one that's a really light pattern. So when I fill these background spaces, I want to choose patterns that contrast these foreground strings. I'll use light patterns on the left, dark patterns on the right, and in the middle I may choose to have a pattern that transitions from one style to another as it moves over. For my transitional pattern, I decided that I would do one pattern but color it differently. On the left side, I have no shading whatsoever, whereas on the right side, I filled the squares black and alternated some gray in the auras around the squares. And there, that Zentangle tile is finished. The only thing left is to sign or initial it. And if you watched last week's video, you may not recognize some of these patterns, so I just wanted to let you know what I did with them. Obviously that is that pattern, and that is this pattern here, but with the big and small pens swapped places. This pattern is that one, but using the small pen instead of the large one. This pattern is that pattern, again using the small pen instead of the large one. The pattern in the middle is this pattern with some shading going on one side. This pattern was one of my branching patterns, but I flipped which areas were dark. I made the background dark and I made the squares dark and left the aura white. And this last pattern was one I just kind of made up on the spot. I wanted to do something grid-like to kind of mirror that side a little bit, but I wanted it to be super dark. So I darkened up the lines crisscrossing the grid, and alternating squares have horizontal or vertical hatching marks to darken them up. And that's it for today's Zentangle video. If you enjoyed this Zentangle lesson and you're interested in learning more about Zentangles or about doodling in general, take a look at some of my previous videos about Zentangles, or subscribe and get notified every Sunday when my weekly Zentangles come out. Also, if you're interested, I do videos every Thursday where I give tutorials for beginner level artists. As always, I hope that this video was able to inspire you today, and if you ever get discouraged with your art, don't forget, you don't have to be the best, you just have to do your best.